The morning the trial resumed, Cedar Falls felt too quiet, as if the entire town were holding its breath. The courthouse, a squat stone building with iron-framed windows and heavy wooden doors, usually hosted small disputes, traffic citations, and the occasional family matter. But today, it felt like walking into the center of a storm. Inside Courtroom 2, fluorescent lights hummed overhead, offering a cold, washed-out glow that flattened every expression. The room was packed, too packed. Reporters squeezed into corners, their cameras lowered but ready. Locals whispered into each other's coats. A tension hung in the air so dense it felt like another presence. And in the middle of it, sitting with rigid focus beside his handler, was Ranger, the police department's most respected K-9. Ranger wasn't just a dog. He was the kind of creature that commanded a room without making a sound. A full-bodied sable German shepherd with a broad chest and the composure of a soldier. He sat tall, paws planted, amber eyes scanning his surroundings with the quiet intelligence that had earned him commendations no animal could ever truly understand. He wasn't here to intimidate, but his size alone made every person think twice before moving too suddenly. Officer Hale, his handler of 5 years, stood beside him in uniform, posture locked in that precise stance law enforcement officers seemed born knowing. But Hale's jaw was tight, his fingers drumming anxiously against Ranger's leash. He'd been in court dozens of times with Ranger, but today felt different in a way he couldn't yet name. Case files lined the prosecutor's desk, pages detailing the kind of horror no one wants to believe could happen in their community. The defendant, Mark Walker, sat slouched at the defense table, hands clasped, eyes half-lidded, his expression a careful mixture of arrogance and boredom. He didn't look like a monster. He looked like a man who had mastered the art of vanishing in plain sight. But everyone in that room knew better. Across the aisle, clinging tightly to her grandmother's skirt, was Lily Carter, the smallest person in the courtroom, and yet the most important. Her hair was gathered in a tiny ponytail high on her head, though wisps had escaped and now curled around her cheeks like soft question marks. Her shoes, pink with glittery stars, didn't quite match the solemn occasion, but they were likely the only pair she would wear without screaming. She was 3 years old, impossibly small, impossibly fragile. A child who should have been playing with stuffed animals, learning colors, asking for snacks. Instead, she was here, a witness, a victim. Her grandmother, Janet Carter, kept whispering the same words into the top of Lily's head. "You don't have to be scared, sweetheart. I'm right here. You're safe." But Lily didn't look safe. She looked like a tiny creature cornered by a world too big, too loud, too cruel. The prosecuting attorney, Megan Dorsey, flipped through her notes for the 15th time, though she already knew them by heart. Her temple throbbed. Presenting testimony was always stressful, but relying on a toddler's willingness to speak in front of strangers, especially strangers connected to what she'd endured, was an entirely different brand of pressure. The judge, Honorable Marian Albright, entered with the heavy presence of someone who'd lived decades in the pursuit of justice. Her expression remained neutral, but there was a softness in her eyes whenever she glanced toward Lily. Everyone in the room knew the judge would tread carefully. Child testimony was a minefield. One misstep, and the defense would pounce. The bailiff announced the proceedings, voices quieting to a still, glass-like silence. Megan Dorsey approached Lily's grandmother. "Janet," she whispered, "we don't need her to give a speech. We just need a few simple answers. If she gets too scared, we stop. Okay." Janet nodded earnestly, but her eyes flickered toward the defendant and darkened. Meanwhile, something strange was happening across the room. Ranger's ears twitched. His gaze, previously methodical and calm, suddenly sharpened. He wasn't looking at the defendant. He wasn't watching the attorneys. No, he was staring directly at Lily. Hale noticed the shift immediately. Ranger was trained to be observant, yes, but this was different. This was attention rooted not in duty but in instinct. "Easy boy," Hale murmured under his breath, though Ranger hadn't moved an inch. Lily, still hiding in her grandmother's skirt, peeked out and saw him. Their eyes met across the courtroom, her watery, fearful brown ones and his steady amber ones. In that instant, Lily let go of her grandmother's leg. At first, Janet didn't notice. She was talking with Dorsey. But the shift of weight, the release of tiny fingers, the sudden absence of pressure around her knee, she turned just in time to see Lily stepping away from her. "Lily," she whispered, trying not to draw attention. But Lily didn't hear her. Her eyes remained locked on Ranger, as if something in her tiny chest had clicked into place, something that told her, go to him. She took one small step, then another. Hale straightened. "Judge," he said softly, unsure whether to pull Ranger closer, stand in front of him, or do absolutely nothing. The judge watched quietly, her brows knitting into a line of concern mixed with curiosity. The defense attorney's pen stopped mid-tap. Reporters lifted their cameras. The entire room held its breath as this miniature figure, dwarfed by every piece of furniture, every adult watching, walked across a courtroom filled with memories she surely wished she didn't have. Her dress, a pale yellow with daisies, swayed with each hesitant movement. Her bottom lip trembled. Her hands curled into fists, but she pressed on, step by tiny step. Ranger didn't growl. He didn't move. But his tail stilled, his forehead creased, and his head lowered slightly, not in submission, but in something almost like recognition. Janet took a step forward. "Lily, honey, come back here." But the judge raised a hand. "Let her." Janet froze. The room collectively exhaled a shaky breath. Lily was now halfway across the distance. Every adult was afraid to even blink. Her shoes made soft taps against the courtroom tile, tap, 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 each one louder in the silence. She stopped briefly when she reached the midpoint, chest heaving with nervous breaths, but it was as though something kept pulling her forward. Officer Hale felt sweat forming on his palms despite the cold air. Rangers were trained not to react unpredictably, but children were unpredictable by nature. He didn't know how this would play out. Still, Ranger didn't break his gaze. As Lily got closer, she slowed, the way someone approaches a towering, awe-inspiring mountain or a giant creature from a fairy tale. Her eyes widened as she craned her neck to look up at him. She stopped just inches away. With a shaky breath, she reached out one small hand. The defense attorney whispered sharply, "Is this allowed?" The judge shot him a look that shut him up instantly. Ranger lowered his head, not aggressively but gently, carefully, bringing his massive face level with hers. His breath puffed softly across her wrist. Lily's hand trembled, then steadied, then touched him. Her fingers slid into his fur. Ranger exhaled deeply. A sound of utter stillness swept across the room. His tail gave one slow, deliberate thump on the floor. And that simple, almost imperceptible movement sent a shockwave through everyone watching. Officer Hale's throat tightened. Ranger never reacted like this. Not to strangers, not even to most officers. But here he was, bowing his head to a 3-year-old girl, as if he understood something none of them did. Lily leaned in the slightest bit, her forehead nearly touching his. Ranger nudged her hand with the softest push, comforting, protective, unmistakably tender. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Janet covered her mouth, tears spilling over. Hale's eyes widened as he whispered, "What on earth?" And before anyone could fully process the quiet miracle unfolding before them, Lily's lips parted. She whispered something, so small, so fragile, that only Ranger seemed to hear. His ears twitched. Her shoulders relaxed. And for the first time since the case began, she didn't look afraid. But no one else heard what she said. Not the judge, not the attorneys, not her grandmother. Everyone stood frozen. What did she whisper to the police dog in the middle of court? The courtroom had descended into a heavy, almost sacred silence. Every eye remained riveted on the small figure at the center of the room, Lily Carter, only 3 years old, standing inches from the hulking form of Ranger, the police dog. It was impossible not to notice the contrast. Her delicate frame against his immense, disciplined presence, her trembling hand brushing against his sleek, sable fur. Yet in that moment, neither size nor fear seemed to matter. Officer Hale shifted uncomfortably, the leash in his hands taut but steady. He was trained to anticipate aggression from either side, from humans or from his K-9 partner. Ranger had been in tense standoffs before, in raids, during apprehensions, but never like this. A toddler approaching him in the middle of a trial, no one daring to intervene, and Ranger remained unnervingly calm. Hale's instincts screamed at him to act, yet something deeper, something almost instinctual, made him hesitate. The judge's eyes narrowed slightly, but she said nothing. Her hand hovered over her gavel, her ears attuned to every whisper of movement, every creak of the floorboards. She had seen many courtroom dramas, but nothing like this. This was no ordinary testimony. This was an encounter. Lily's fingers finally sank fully into Ranger's thick coat, and the dog shifted minutely, so gently that only those closest could notice. He leaned slightly into her hand as though inviting her, reassuring her. The movement was subtle, but it spoke volumes. Ranger had never initiated physical contact like this. He had never chosen a human to connect with, not like this, not without command. Janet Carter, Lily's grandmother, froze in horror and awe. Her heart pounded in her chest. "Lily, honey, step back," she whispered, her voice trembling. But Lily's gaze never wavered from Ranger. There was an intensity in her small eyes that suggested courage far beyond her years. Across the room, the defendant, Mark Walker, tensed. His face betrayed a flash of something the courtroom had not seen before, a flicker of fear. He leaned back slightly, as if instinctively aware that this child and this dog were aligned in some invisible way he couldn't control. He pressed his fingers against the edge of the table, knuckles white. The defense attorney noticed the sudden shift but said nothing. There was no precedent for this. How do you argue against a silent stare from a toddler and a police dog? "Stay still, Ranger," Officer Hale murmured softly, almost under his breath. The words were meant for the dog, but there was an odd reverence in his tone. Ranger's amber eyes didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply watched, and that quiet, unwavering gaze seemed to anchor Lily. Lily leaned forward just a fraction, tilting her head slightly as if trying to read the silent communication between them. She whispered something again, just a breath, a murmur, a string of sounds only Ranger could comprehend. The dog's ears flicked, a subtle shift in posture that no human could interpret, but anyone paying close attention could sense the bond, the recognition. Something unspoken passed between them, something that immediately set everyone on edge. The entire courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Some jurors instinctively leaned forward in their seats. Others glanced at each other, eyebrows raised in disbelief. Reporters instinctively raised their cameras, their lenses catching the almost cinematic tableau before them. The sound of a pen dropping somewhere in the back echoed unnervingly loud. Janet's hand shook as she tried to reach Lily, but the child's tiny hand remained fixed in Ranger's fur. "Sweetheart, please," she whispered. But Lily shook her head, a small, resolute movement that made everyone realize this child was acting with purpose, not fear. Ranger's tail gave a single, measured thump on the floor, a signal Hale recognized instantly. In his training, that meant alertness, yes, but combined with his immobility and focus on Lily, it was something else entirely, a calm, protective acknowledgement. The judge, sensing the gravity of the moment, allowed a pause in the proceedings. "Let the child be," she said firmly, her voice carrying an authority that silenced even murmurs from the back of the room. "She's clearly seeking comfort. Allow her to find it." The defense attorney, pale and unnerved, leaned toward his client. "He's just a dog," he muttered, more to convince himself than anyone else. But Walker's face betrayed him, sweat forming on his upper lip, eyes darting between Lily and Ranger. There was a tension in him that no courtroom psychology class could prepare one for. For Lily, those few seconds felt eternal. She pressed her hand closer, feeling the warmth of Ranger's body, the steady beat of his heart beneath the thick fur. She wasn't thinking about the courtroom, the judge, the lawyers, or the cameras. She was thinking about safety, about trust, about a creature that didn't frighten her, about a presence that told her, "You're not alone." Suddenly, Ranger's massive head tilted slightly, a motion almost imperceptible to the untrained eye. It was as if he were listening, not to words, but to emotions. And in that tilt, in that slight movement, Lily seemed to find courage she didn't know she possessed. Her lips parted. The whisper that followed was barely audible, a thread of sound that could have been mistaken for imagination. "It's okay." Ranger's ears twitched in acknowledgement. He exhaled slowly, the sound deep and resonant, as though validating her bravery. The bond was now unmistakable. But the moment of calm didn't last. Walker shifted in his seat, a barely perceptible jerk, and Ranger's body stiffened. Hale felt the change instantly. This was instinct, years of K-9 training telling him that something was wrong. Ranger wasn't reacting to Lily. Ranger was reacting to Walker. The defendant's hands trembled on the table, his knuckles whitening. He tried to mask it, but the subtle signs betrayed him. A foot tapping too quickly, a shoulder stiffening, a shallow intake of breath. The courtroom caught it, an almost imperceptible tension that sent a ripple of unease through the air. Megan Dorsey, the prosecutor, noticed immediately. She leaned forward. Something was happening that no one had anticipated. The focus of the courtroom had shifted. It was no longer just a case about abuse and testimony. It was now a silent confrontation, mediated by a child and a dog. Janet Carter's hands were trembling uncontrollably now. She wanted to move, to pick Lily up, to remove her from the scene, but she couldn't. The judge had made it clear, and besides, something primal told her, let this happen. Something important was unfolding, something beyond words. Lily, emboldened by Ranger's calmness, stepped slightly closer. She whispered again, another fragment of sound, softer than before. Hale leaned down, his instincts screaming at him to intervene, but his hand stayed on the leash. Ranger's posture remained unchanged, protective, calm. The judge, sensing the courtroom tension, called for a brief recess. But the recess wasn't meant to be ordinary. People moved in slow motion. The press clicked pictures. Jurors whispered among themselves. The air was electric with anticipation, everyone wondering, what would this child say next? Walker's eyes flicked from Lily to Ranger, then back again. He swallowed hard, a barely audible noise that carried more fear than anyone expected from a grown man. There was something in that silent, golden stare of Ranger that unnerved him deeply. And then, in a voice barely above a whisper, Lily spoke words that silenced the room entirely. Words only Ranger seemed to understand. Words that would change everything in ways no one yet realized. Hale's heart pounded. Judge Albright leaned forward. The defendant's body tensed in ways that were now impossible to hide. The courtroom waited. And in that pregnant pause, it was clear. This small girl and this police dog had created a bond that was about to alter the course of the trial in ways no one could have predicted. What had she whispered? No one except Ranger knew. And the suspense, heavy, suffocating, undeniable, settled over the courtroom like a storm about to break. The courtroom's silence stretched taut, like a wire about to snap. Every adult in the room seemed frozen in place, unsure whether to speak, breathe, or even blink. Cameras poised, fingers hovering over pens, eyes glued to the improbable scene at the center. Lily Carter, a toddler no bigger than a backpack, standing confidently before Ranger, the massive German shepherd, and whispering words no one else could hear. Officer Hale could barely process what was happening. His hand rested lightly on Ranger's leash, but the dog didn't pull, didn't shift, didn't growl. He simply remained a mountain of calm attentiveness, gazing into the child's eyes as though reading a language older than words. Hale's training screamed at him to intervene, to protect the child, but instinct told him something different, to watch. Something extraordinary was unfolding. Lily's grandmother, Janet, felt a swirl of panic and awe. She had tried to pull her granddaughter back moments ago, but now she hesitated. There was a gravity in Lily's posture, a determination no one could dismiss. What is she doing?" Janet whispered to herself, though the words barely left her lips. Ranger shifted slightly, moving a paw forward just a fraction, aligning his massive head with Lily's height. His ears twitched. His nose lifted subtly, catching her scent, the faint trace of lingering fear and desperation that clung to her like a second skin. Then, as if answering an unspoken question, Ranger nudged her hand gently with his snout, a quiet, deliberate gesture of acceptance. The courtroom collectively exhaled, the faintest sound, like air leaving a balloon. Even the reporters, always alert, couldn't hide the awe on their faces. Walker, the defendant, leaned back in his chair, and for the first time his composure cracked. He fidgeted, fingers drumming nervously against the table, eyes flicking between Lily and Ranger. A bead of sweat traced down his temple. The defense attorney noticed it but said nothing, sensing instinctively that words here could not contain the chaos forming in the room. Then Lily whispered again, just a thread of a sound, delicate and nearly imperceptible. Ranger's ears pricked sharply, his body stiffened, and he exhaled in a low, measured breath, a growl forming only in the deepest part of his chest. It was not aggression. It was recognition. A connection had been made. Officer Hale's hand tightened on the leash, but he did not move. He always knew when Ranger had detected something. But this was beyond training, beyond protocol. This was almost instinctual. Lily pressed her forehead gently against Ranger's snout, her small chest rising and falling with a rhythm that seemed to calm both of them. The dog remained motionless, yet every fiber of his being was alert. It was the kind of trust and understanding that only forms in moments of profound need. And then the impossible happened. Lily took a step backward, still touching Ranger, and whispered words loud enough for Officer Hale to catch. "He's scared." The courtroom gasped. The judge leaned forward, eyes narrowing. "Who is scared, Lily?" she asked softly, careful not to startle her. "The man," Lily said, pointing with a tiny, unwavering finger toward Walker. Murmurs erupted in the room. The words had barely left her lips before Walker's face changed. Color drained from his cheeks. His eyes darted to Ranger. Hale noticed the subtle shiver that ran through the dog's frame, a reaction so rare, so precise that it sent a chill down the spine of everyone watching. Ranger did not react to strangers this way. Not ever. And yet there it was. Fear recognized, fear mirrored. Janet gasped, taking a half-step forward. "Lily, what do you mean?" she whispered. Lily turned, looking back at her grandmother with eyes far older than her years. "He hurt me, and he had a dog like Ranger. He yelled at it, hit it," she said, her voice quivering but steady enough to leave no doubt about her meaning. The prosecution shifted, sensing an opening they hadn't anticipated. Megan Dorsey, the lead prosecutor, leaned in, her pen poised over her notes, her mind racing. This child, with the smallest voice, was revealing something that had been hidden for months, something Walker's carefully constructed facade had never accounted for. Officer Hale swallowed hard. Memories surfaced of a neighborhood complaint months prior. A man reported to have mistreated a dog matching Ranger's breed. The case had gone nowhere. Evidence was scarce. Witnesses unreliable. But now, standing in this courtroom, the puzzle pieces began to align in a way no one could ignore. Walker's defense attorney stood abruptly. "Objection, Your Honor, this is hearsay." But the judge held up a hand, her gavel poised. "Let her finish," she said, her voice calm but firm, commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Lily didn't move. She remained pressed close to Ranger, her small hands gripping his fur like a lifeline. She whispered again, words almost lost to the tension of the moment. "He remembers." A shiver rippled through the courtroom. No one spoke, not immediately. Officer Hale's pulse thundered in his ears. Ranger's growl had deepened, low and guttural, reverberating through the polished floors. This was not a dog reacting to a threat, it was recognition, memory, fear, trauma. The combination of instincts and experiences so precise it sent a shiver through even the most seasoned law enforcement officers in the room. The judge's eyes met the defendant. He was sweating now, fingers trembling against the edge of the table. "Mr. Walker," she said, "what does she mean by he remembers?" Walker's lips parted, then closed. He tried to regain composure, but the flicker of panic in his eyes betrayed him. His jaw twitched. A flush of color rose in his cheeks, then disappeared as quickly as it came. Hale saw Ranger's ears flick again, subtle but meaningful. The dog had sensed something that the child could not yet articulate, something Walker had hoped would remain hidden. Megan Dorsey took a careful step forward. "Your Honor, may we explore this further?" she asked, her voice calm but urgent. The judge nodded slowly, understanding immediately that this was no ordinary testimony. This was something else, something profound. "Proceed," she said. Janet Carter's hand shook as she tried to reach for Lily, but the girl didn't move. Instead, she whispered almost to herself, "He remembers the dog. He remembers me." The words hung in the air, heavy and unsettling. Everyone in the courtroom felt it. The jurors, the reporters, the bailiffs, even the defense team, they all sensed the shift. The case had transformed from a simple matter of testimony into a confrontation between hidden truths and undeniable instincts. Walker shifted in his seat again, a barely perceptible movement that made Hale's heart race. Ranger's body tensed. The dog's tail twitched once, then rested again, alert but controlled. He was reading something the humans could not, and Lily, her small voice rising in courage, was guiding him. Megan Dorsey took a deep breath. "Lily," she said gently, "can you tell us why you came to Ranger today?" The child looked up, her face wet with tears, her lip trembling but her eyes clear and focused. "Because he's the only one who's not scared to hear me," she said. A hush fell over the courtroom. Walker's hands flew to his face, pressing against his temples. His breathing quickened. He had counted on everyone being distracted by a child's innocence, by chaos in her words. But Ranger's recognition, combined with Lily's clarity, had stripped him bare in front of everyone. The judge leaned forward. "Explain, Lily, tell us more." Lily's tiny fingers gripped Ranger's fur tighter, "because he knows bad people, and he remembers what they do." Ranger's growl deepened slightly, low and resonant like a drumbeat of warning. Officer Hale's eyes widened. This was extraordinary behavior, never before exhibited in the field, never seen during training. Ranger was reacting not just to Lily, but to the essence of what Walker represented. The defendant's chair creaked as he shifted, an audible manifestation of his growing fear. He swallowed hard, trying to compose himself, but Ranger's steady, unflinching gaze held him in a way no human presence could. The courtroom seemed to tilt in slow motion. Every eye was fixed on the improbable pair, child and dog, united in a silent, undeniable truth. Then Lily whispered two words that changed everything. "He remembers." And in that instant, the tension exploded. The judge, the attorneys, the jurors, even the press, all understood that something monumental had shifted. The courtroom was no longer just a place of legal proceedings. It was a stage for truth, raw and unfiltered, delivered by the smallest, bravest voice in the room. Walker froze. He knew he had been exposed. Ranger growled low, protective and unwavering. And Lily, for the first time that day, smiled. A small, tentative smile, but one that carried the weight of justice in its simplicity. The courtroom would never be the same. The courtroom seemed suspended in time. Every adult, every reporter, every juror sat frozen, eyes locked on Lily Carter and Ranger. The small 3-year-old girl had stepped into the center of a storm she could not possibly understand, and yet somehow she commanded it. Her tiny hand still rested on Ranger's thick fur, and the dog's amber eyes remained locked on hers, his massive head lowered, his body tense yet calm. The judge, Honorable Marian Albright, leaned forward, her gavel poised on the bench. She was a woman of decades-long experience in the courtroom, someone who had seen countless testimonies crumble and build in the span of minutes. But this was new. There was no precedent for what she was witnessing. "Lily," the judge said gently, her voice steady but soft, "would you like to tell us what's happening?" The courtroom held its collective breath. Lily swallowed audibly, a tiny, determined sound that cut through the silence. Her lips quivered, but her eyes, those impossibly mature, unwavering eyes, remained on Ranger. The child took a deep, shuddering breath and whispered 2 words, words that were barely audible, yet carried weight that no one could deny. "He's scared." The murmurs began immediately. Reporters glanced at each other, unsure if they had heard correctly. Jurors leaned forward in their seats. Officers shifted, hand on holster, unsure if they were witnessing the beginning of chaos or the beginning of truth. The defendant, Mark Walker, froze. His hands clenched the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Hale noticed it first. Ranger's ears twitched, a subtle but unmistakable signal of recognition and alert. The dog's growl, low and deep, vibrated in the polished floor, resonating through the courtroom like a warning. Walker's breathing grew shallow, quick. He shifted in his seat, trying to appear casual, but every movement betrayed him. Hale's years of experience in K9 handling screamed at him. Ranger had never reacted this way to anyone. Not officers, not suspects, not strangers. Only Lily's words had elicited this response. Megan Dorsey, the prosecutor, moved slightly forward, her voice calm but urgent. "Lily," she said, "can you tell us what you mean when you say he's scared?" Lily's tiny fingers gripped Ranger's fur tighter as though drawing strength from the dog's presence. She tilted her head slightly, her voice barely above a whisper. Because he hurt me. And he had a dog like Ranger. He yelled at it, hit it." The courtroom went still again. Every adult present registered the weight of the words, but none more so than Hale. A memory surfaced from months prior, a neighbor's complaint about a man who had been seen abusing a German shepherd. The case had gone nowhere due to lack of evidence, and Walker had been allowed to continue his life, unmonitored. But now, standing in front of him, Lily had brought that memory back into sharp, undeniable focus. Walker's face changed. Color drained from his cheeks. His hands shook. He tried to speak, to say something, but nothing came out. The defense attorney stood abruptly. "Objection," he barked. "This is completely hearsay." Judge Albright's hand shot up, stopping him mid-sentence. "Let the child finish," she said firmly. Her voice carried a weight of authority that silenced the courtroom immediately. Lily took a small step closer to Ranger, as if the dog's presence gave her courage she did not otherwise possess. She whispered another phrase, words so soft that only Hale and Ranger seemed to register their significance. "He remembers." The effect was instantaneous. Ranger's growl deepened, low and resonant, vibrating through the courtroom. Hale's hand tightened on the leash, instinctively bracing for movement, but the dog remained still, rigid and alert, every muscle poised like a coiled spring. Walker's face paled further. Hale had handled aggressive criminals, but he had never seen fear reflected back from a dog in such a pure, instinctive way. Ranger wasn't reacting to a threat. He was reacting to recognition, to memory, to trauma. The jurors whispered among themselves, exchanging glances of disbelief and curiosity. Some leaned forward, their eyes wide. Others instinctively held their breath. Reporters adjusted their cameras, desperate to capture the tableau unfolding in front of them. It was cinematic in the truest sense. Child and dog, innocence and instinct, terror and truth. Janet Carter, her hands shaking uncontrollably, wanted to intervene, to scoop Lily into her arms, but she did not. She felt a primal understanding, a knowing that something monumental was happening, something beyond words, something that could never be scripted. Megan Dorsey stepped forward. "Lily," she said softly, "can you tell us why you went a ranger today?" Lily's eyes, brimming with tears, flicked briefly toward her grandmother, then returned to Ranger. "Because he's the only one who's not scared to hear me," she said. The words settled over the courtroom like a thunderclap. Walker's hands flew to his face, pressing against his temples. His breathing quickened. He had counted on the child being intimidated, on his presence and reputation carrying weight, but he had not accounted for Ranger. The dog had stripped him bare in front of everyone. Judge Albright leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Explain, Lily, tell us more." The child's tiny hands tightened further around Ranger's fur. "Because he knows bad people, and he remembers what they do." The courtroom seemed to tilt slightly, the tension so thick it was almost tangible. Every person present could feel it, the collision of innocence and instinct, the meeting of trauma and memory. Ranger's growl deepened slightly, low and resonant, a warning and a signal of recognition that no one could ignore. Walker's chair creaked as he shifted, a nearly imperceptible movement that spoke volumes. He tried to mask it with a cough, a nervous gesture, but it was too late. Ranger's eyes were locked on him, unyielding, unwavering, unflinching. Officer Hale felt sweat bead on his forehead. This was no longer a trial based purely on testimony or evidence. This was an exposure of truth so raw and undeniable that no human argument could suppress it. Ranger's instincts, combined with Lily's courage, had created a force greater than the courtroom itself. Megan Dorsey stepped closer, sensing the critical moment. "Your Honor," she said, her voice calm but urgent, "may we explore this further? I believe the child's interaction with the dog is providing us with insight that has never been available before." Judge Albright nodded slowly. "Proceed," she said. She understood immediately. This was no ordinary testimony. This was truth in its purest form, delivered by a voice society often underestimated. Janet Carter's hands shook violently now, tears streaming down her face. She wanted to protect Lily, but she could not. She realized that the child's small voice had reached places adults could not, and Lily, guided by instinct and courage, continued. "He remembers the dog. He remembers me," Lily whispered, her voice trembling but resolute. Ranger shifted slightly, a deep growl vibrating through his chest, and Hale understood fully. The dog recognized the essence of Walker's actions. Recognition, memory, fear. It all emanated from Walker in a way only Ranger could interpret. Walker's hands flew to his face. He was exposed, vulnerable, cornered. And in the silent, charged courtroom, every adult present felt it. The child, Lily Carter, had not just spoken. She had revealed something fundamental, something primal, something that no one could ignore. Ranger exhaled slowly, his body remaining rigid, alert, protective. The dog was unwavering. The message was clear. The truth had arrived. The courtroom would never be the same. And Lily, for the first time that day, allowed herself a small, tentative smile. A smile that carried courage, innocence, and the weight of justice. The first words had been spoken. And they had changed everything. The courtroom was electric. Every person present felt the weight of the moment as Lily Carter, a 3-year-old girl, stood inches from Ranger, the police dog whose immense presence seemed to dwarf the space around them. Her tiny hands gripped his fur as if she had discovered a lifeline, and the dog, rigid yet calm, did not move. Not in fear, not in threat, not in hesitation. He simply watched her, watched the room, watched the defendant. Officer Hale's knuckles were white around Ranger's leash. He had handled countless high-stakes situations, from armed suspects to volatile crowds, but this This was different. Ranger's behavior defied protocol, defied logic. The dog was reacting not to commands, not to training, but to something deeper: recognition, instinct, memory. Across the room, Mark Walker, the defendant, shifted in his seat. His posture was rigid, but it betrayed him. Subtle movements, shallow breaths, the way his eyes darted between Lily and Ranger. He tried to maintain composure, tried to appear unaffected, but his body language betrayed a creeping panic. Megan Dorsey, the prosecutor, sensed the opening immediately. This was no longer simply a case built on evidence and testimony. This was a revelation. A child and a dog had exposed something so primal, so undeniable, that the courtroom itself seemed powerless to resist it. "Lily," Dorsey said softly, moving closer without startling her, "can you tell us what you saw? What happened with him?" The child's voice, small but steady, filled the courtroom. "He hit me. He yelled at his dog like Ranger, and he's scared because Ranger is brave." A collective shiver ran through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged wide-eyed glances, scribbling notes furiously. The reporters leaned forward, cameras clicking almost uncontrollably. Even the bailiffs, who had witnessed countless trials, couldn't hide the tension gripping them. Walker's face drained of color. Hale noticed a faint tremor in his hands. For months, Walker had meticulously constructed a persona of normalcy, someone careful, measured, in control. And now in this courtroom, those carefully curated layers were dissolving under the unrelenting gaze of a child and a dog. The judge, Honorable Marian Albright, allowed the pause to stretch for a heartbeat too long. She understood instinctively that rushing would destroy the fragile dynamic unfolding. The tension had become a living thing, weaving between every person in the room. Ranger growled low and deliberate, his deep, guttural warning vibrating through the polished floors. It wasn't aggression. It was a statement, recognition, judgment. Hale swallowed hard, feeling the hairs on his neck stand on end. Janet Carter, Lily's grandmother, whispered a trembling plea. "Honey, step back." But Lily didn't move. Instead, she pressed her small forehead against Ranger's snout, drawing courage from his calm presence. And then it happened. A sound came from Walker, a soft, almost imperceptible gasp. The courtroom froze. Everyone noticed it. Everyone understood. Even the reporters lowered their cameras. The sound was not words, but it was confession enough. Dorsey's mind raced. She had prepared for months, but she hadn't anticipated this. A child's courage combined with a dog's instinct had created evidence stronger than any paper trail or testimony could. It was raw. It was undeniable. It was impossible to dismiss. "Lily," Dorsey continued, "you're very brave. Can you tell the court why you trusted Ranger?" The child's gaze remained unwavering. "Because he listens," she said. "He knows he knows the bad man." Ranger's amber eyes flicked toward Walker. The dog's body tensed slightly, low growl vibrating, tail stiffening just enough to signal alertness. Hale's pulse quickened. Ranger was reading Walker's presence, every micro-expression, every shift of weight, and signaling it. Walker's defense attorney fidgeted, suddenly aware that his client was no longer the focus. The spotlight had shifted uncomfortably to a toddler and a police dog. Every instinct he had screamed at him. This was unprecedented, dangerous, unpredictable. Judge Albright leaned forward. "Mr. Walker," she said, voice cutting through the tension, "the court recognizes that your demeanor has shifted. Would you like to respond?" Walker opened his mouth, then closed it. He shook his head subtly, as if hopping silence would erase the moment. But Ranger's gaze held him like iron. The dog's presence was not just physical, it was accusatory. Hale felt an almost electric tension between man and dog. He had seen Ranger in raids and apprehensions, in life-or-death standoffs, but never in this form. Ranger was not acting on command. He was acting on instinct, memory, and recognition of truth. Dorsey seized the moment. "Your Honor," she said, The child has revealed connections and observations that corroborate prior reports of abuse, which were previously deemed inconclusive. Ranger's reaction provides us with confirmation that is impossible to ignore. We ask that the court allow this interaction to remain part of the record. The judge nodded slowly, understanding the gravity. "So noted," she said. "The court will consider the interaction and the child's testimony as part of the proceedings." Janet Carter's hands shook violently as tears streamed down her cheeks. She finally whispered words she hadn't dared before. "Lily, honey, you're amazing." But Lily's attention never wavered. She looked at Ranger and whispered, "He remembers. He knows he did wrong." The dog's growl deepened, a resonance that shook the wooden floors. Hale's chest tightened. Ranger's instincts were precise. His body language communicated a clear, undeniable truth. The defendant's guilt was written in micro-expressions, in posture, in fear. Walker's face became pale. He pressed his palms to his forehead, jaw clenching. The carefully maintained mask of control had completely shattered. The courtroom, usually a place of ordered debate and procedural calm, had transformed. The energy was now raw, emotional, and unpredictable. Everyone could feel it, the collision of innocence and instinct, of fear and recognition, of past trauma and present courage. Lily whispered again, a barely audible sound that only Ranger seemed to comprehend. "He remembers the hurt." Ranger responded instantly, a low, deep growl vibrating through his chest. Hale's grip on the leash tightened involuntarily. He knew Ranger's behavior was beyond anything he had ever encountered in the field. This was pure instinct, pure judgment. Megan Dorsey turned to the jury. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, voice calm but firm, "you have just witnessed something extraordinary. This child has courage, this dog has instincts honed by experience, and together they have revealed truths that cannot be ignored. Please consider the significance of this moment carefully." The jurors leaned forward, captivated, taking in the gravity of what they had seen. Some whispered quietly to each other. Others simply stared, absorbing the raw, undeniable clarity of the interaction. Walker's defense attorney fumbled, struggling to regain control. "Your Honor, this is preposterous. A child cannot." Judge Albright cut him off, gavel poised. "The child's testimony, her interaction with the dog, and the dog's response are now officially part of the record. The court will not entertain objections that attempt to diminish their significance." Walker slumped in his chair, defeated, exposed. Every instinct he had relied upon, fear of scrutiny, manipulation of narrative, intimidation, was now irrelevant. Ranger's presence and Lily's bravery had stripped him bare. Lily, sensing the shift in the room, finally allowed herself a small smile. A smile that radiated courage, innocence, and the quiet, unstoppable power of truth. And Ranger, his gaze unwavering, lowered his massive head just enough to nuzzle her gently, a silent gesture of validation. The courtroom had changed forever. In the space of a few minutes, a child and a dog had revealed truths that no paper trail, no testimony, no legal argument could have conveyed. The energy in the room was palpable, a charged tension that would ripple through the trial, shaping every decision to come. And for Walker, the defendant, the realization was devastating. He was no longer facing a courtroom. He was facing judgment in its purest, most instinctual form. The first words had unleashed a chain reaction. And the courtroom would never, ever be the same. The air in the courtroom felt almost electric. Every breath was measured, every movement deliberate, as if even a blink could disrupt the fragile balance that had formed between Lily Carter, the 3-year-old girl, and Ranger, the police dog. The child and the dog had transformed the proceedings, turning a routine courtroom into a stage of primal truth. Every eye followed them, every mind racing to process what had just happened. Lily clutched Ranger's fur tightly. Her small knuckles were white, but her eyes were fierce, unflinching. Ranger remained statuesque beside her, body tense yet controlled, ears alert, amber eyes sharp and unwavering. Officer Hale's hand stayed on the leash, not to restrain, but to ensure the dog remained steady under the intensity of the room. The jurors leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the unfolding drama. They weren't watching testimony. They were witnessing a silent, instinctive interrogation that transcended words. Every gesture, every subtle shift in posture between the child, the dog, and the defendant, Mark Walker, carried meaning. Walker's face was pale and rigid. He had tried to maintain a facade of composure, but the tension radiating from Ranger and the clarity in Lily's eyes stripped it away piece by piece. Hale noticed the micro-signals, the slight quiver of his lip, the shallow breath, the tightening of his shoulders. Ranger's instincts had identified every nuance of fear, and Lily had articulated it without hesitation. Megan Dorsey, sensing the critical moment, approached slowly. "Lily," she said, crouching to the child's level, "you've shown so much bravery. Can you tell us if you ever saw him do something wrong?" Lily's small lips quivered, but she didn't look away from Ranger. "Yes," she whispered. "He hurt people and dogs, and I'm scared he might hurt me again." A wave of murmurs ran through the courtroom. The jurors exchanged uneasy glances, some nodding subtly, some wide-eyed and whispering to each other. Even the reporters adjusted their cameras, realizing that what they were witnessing was far beyond a typical courtroom drama. Walker shifted in his chair, almost imperceptibly, but Ranger noticed. The dog's ears twitched, body stiffened, and a low growl rumbled in his chest, not at Lily, not at Hale, but at Walker. It was a warning, a recognition, an acknowledgement of past events that only the dog understood fully. Hale's pulse raced. Ranger had never responded to a human this way unless there was imminent danger or a memory of threat. The judge, Honorable Marion Albright, leaned forward, studying the child carefully. "Lily," she said, "you are very brave. Can you tell the court more about what you saw?" Lily hesitated, then pressed her forehead gently against Ranger's snout. She whispered two words, her voice trembling but clear. "He remembers." The courtroom froze. Ranger's growl deepened, vibrating through the polished wood floors, a physical presence that made every adult in the room sit up straighter. Hale's hand gripped the leash tighter, but Ranger didn't move. He simply radiated a protective, unwavering focus that pinned Walker in place. Walker's face went slack. Hale could see the panic rising in him. His carefully maintained persona, calm, composed, untouchable, was dissolving under the pure, silent accusation of a child and a dog. He tried to shift in his seat, but Ranger's gaze pinned him like iron. Dorsey saw her opportunity. "Your Honor," she said, her voice steady but urgent. "The child's statements, combined with Ranger's reactions, provide evidence that cannot be ignored. We request that the court acknowledge the significance of this interaction as part of the record." Judge Albright nodded slowly. "So noted," she said. "The interaction will remain part of the official record." She paused, then added, "It is clear that the child and the dog together have revealed details that may otherwise have remained hidden." Janet Carter, trembling uncontrollably, whispered to herself, "My baby, my brave baby." Tears streamed down her face as she watched Lily maintain her position beside Ranger. But Lily's attention was fixed. She was no longer just a frightened child, she was a witness, a guide, a bridge between past trauma and present truth. She whispered again, barely audible, "He remembers the hurt." Ranger's response was immediate. A deep guttural growl emanated from his chest, a sound that resonated through the room. It wasn't aggression, it was acknowledgement, recognition, judgment. The dog's instincts, honed over years of service, had identified something profound, a man who had caused harm and a child who had survived. Walker's hands flew to his face, pressing against his temples. His breathing grew shallow and rapid. He had been counting on the child's fear to silence her, on his carefully maintained facade to intimidate the courtroom. But Ranger's presence and Lily's courage had undone every calculated move. The jurors watched, rapt, as Lily whispered one more time, this time louder, more confident. "He's not brave like Ranger. He's scared." A shiver ran through the room. Ranger's body tensed further, tail stiff, ears alert. Hale knew the dog was reading every micro-expression, every involuntary tremor. Every instinct told him that Ranger understood the truth better than any human could articulate. Walker's defense attorney struggled to respond. "Your Honor, this is absurd. A child and a dog cannot." Judge Albright raised a hand, silencing him. "The child's testimony and the dog's reactions are officially part of the record. Attempts to undermine their significance will not be entertained." Walker slumped, defeated. His control over the room evaporated. Hale could see the realization dawn in his eyes. He was no longer facing a courtroom. He was facing truth, raw and undeniable in its most primal form. Megan Dorsey moved closer to Lily, kneeling beside her. "You are very brave, Lily," she said gently. "Can you tell us what you want to happen?" The child's eyes, clear and unwavering, met Ranger's gaze and then the judge's. "I want him to know he can't hurt anyone else," she said, small voice trembling but resolute. The courtroom held its breath. Ranger's growl subsided slightly, as if acknowledging her words. Hale felt a weight lift slightly. Ranger was calm but alert, and the message had been delivered. Walker's face was ashen. His carefully constructed defenses, his threats, his intimidation, all of it had crumbled in the presence of innocence, courage, and instinct. He was exposed, vulnerable, unmasked. The energy in the courtroom shifted. No one spoke immediately. Every adult, juror, and officer understood that a pivotal moment had occurred. The collision of innocence and instinct, fear and courage, past trauma and present acknowledgement, had created a force that could not be contained. Janet Carter finally allowed herself to take a small step forward, whispering through tears, "Lily, honey, you're incredible." But Lily didn't move. Her small hand remained on Ranger's fur, her gaze unwavering. She had done more than testify. She had guided the courtroom to a truth that could not be denied. Ranger exhaled slowly, lowering his head just enough to nuzzle her gently. The gesture was small, intimate, yet profound, a silent validation, a promise of protection. And in that moment, everyone in the courtroom understood. A child and a dog had revealed a truth that no document, no witness, no argument could ever replicate. The trial had shifted. The stakes had escalated. And for Walker, the defendant, there was no escaping the consequences. The silent witness had spoken. And the courtroom would never, ever be the same. The courtroom was a powder keg. Silence had returned, but it was thick, tense, like the air before a storm breaks. Every eye remained on Lily Carter and Ranger, the 3-year-old girl and the massive police dog who had become the unlikely linchpins of the trial. Every movement, every breath, every glance seemed magnified in the charged atmosphere. Walker sat frozen, pale, hands gripping the table as though it could anchor him to safety. The child and the dog had unraveled months of careful preparation, exposing his fear, his guilt, and the past he had tried to bury. Hale, standing near Ranger, felt a tremor of disbelief. He had trained dogs to detect substances, track suspects, even protect lives. But never had he seen a dog read a man so completely, react so precisely, and convey truth without a single word. Judge Albright's gaze swept the room. "We are about to proceed with evidence that has never before been presented in a courtroom. This is extraordinary, and I expect the proceedings to be treated with the utmost seriousness." Megan Dorsey took a careful step forward. "Your Honor, if I may, we have additional records, corroborating prior complaints of animal abuse and domestic disturbances connected to the defendant, Mr. Walker. Combined with the child's testimony and Ranger's behavior, the evidence paints a clear pattern of intimidation and harm." Walker's defense attorney sputtered. "Objection, the dog's behavior." "Overruled," the judge said sharply. The dog's behavior, the child's testimony, and the corroborating evidence are all admissible. Continue. Hale tightened his grip on Ranger's leash. The dog's ears twitched, eyes locked on Walker, body tense yet steady. Ranger wasn't just aware of the man's presence. He was analyzing, assessing, confirming suspicions only a trained canine could detect. Hale had witnessed hundreds of tense moments in his career, but never had he felt the raw, unspoken judgment of a creature with no pretense, no motive beyond instinct and truth. Lily stepped closer to Ranger, her small hand tracing his thick fur. "He's scared," she whispered again, "but he won't say it." The jurors leaned forward. Even the reporters adjusted their cameras, sensing that the next moments would define the case. Ranger's growl deepened, low and resonant. Hale could feel the vibrations in his chest. This was no longer a trial, it was a revelation. Walker's face was ashen. His hands trembled slightly, betraying the internal collapse that had begun weeks ago. Every instinct he had relied on, intimidation, manipulation, composure, was irrelevant now. Ranger's unwavering focus and Lily's courage had stripped him to his core. Dorsey addressed the jury. "You have seen the child's bravery and you have witnessed Ranger's reaction. Both are telling the truth in ways words alone cannot convey, but there's more." She motioned to a stack of folders. "These are incident reports, neighbor complaints, and prior investigations. Each details a pattern of abuse, neglect, and intimidation. Until now, much of this evidence was circumstantial. Now, combined with what we have witnessed today, the pattern is undeniable." Walker shifted nervously, leaning back in his chair. Hale noticed the slight tremor in his jaw, the micro-expressions of panic, the tightening of his shoulders. Ranger responded instantly, body rigid, growl deepening. It was almost as if the dog was signaling, "He knows what you did." Judge Albright leaned forward. "Mr. Walker," she said, voice calm but piercing, "is there anything you wish to say in your defense before we proceed?" Walker's lips parted, then closed. He tried to speak, but no words came. His hands dropped limply to the table. Hale watched Ranger's ears twitch again, eyes narrowing. The dog's growl was low, controlled, but unyielding. It was as if Ranger understood every word Walker didn't say, every memory Walker tried to suppress, every guilt he could not hide. Lily, sensing the tension, pressed her forehead against Ranger's snout. Her small voice, trembling yet unwavering, cut through the charged air. "He remembers the hurt. He's scared like Ranger said." The jurors leaned forward in unison. Murmurs rippled across the room. Even the press felt it, the weight of truth, delivered by a child and a dog, undeniable and raw. Dorsey motioned to a visual aid. "Your Honor, the court will see here a timeline of incidents, reports, and complaints tied to the defendant. Each aligns with the observations Lily has made today. Each incident involved intimidation, threats, or harm. Today, her words, combined with Ranger's reaction, confirm what was previously only suspected." The room fell into silence as the slideshow began. Each photo, each report, each incident report highlighted a pattern: broken furniture, scratched doors, distressed animals, neighbors, frightened accounts. Walker's attempts to maintain composure faltered with every slide. Hale noted how Ranger's body tensed even more. Ears forward, tail stiff, growl vibrating, reacting to every subtle flicker of guilt in Walker's expressions. Then Dorsey turned back to Lily. "Lily, can you tell us why you wanted to come forward?" Lily's voice was small, yet carried clarity and weight. "Because he hurt people and dogs, and I don't want anyone else to be scared." The courtroom went still again. Even seasoned reporters accustomed to dramatic testimonies felt the tension tighten around them. It was raw, it was real, it was undeniable. Walker shifted in his seat, attempting to lean forward as if proximity could somehow shield him. Ranger responded immediately, body stiff, growl deepening, eyes locked on Walker. Hale understood instinctively. Ranger was warning, assessing, asserting control in a way no human presence could counteract. Judge Albright's gaze swept the courtroom. The evidence is compelling. The child's testimony, supported by Ranger's behavior and the additional reports, establishes a clear pattern of behavior by the defendant. The court recognizes the significance of this. Walker's defense attorney opened his mouth to argue, but Judge Albright's gavel silenced him. Hale noticed a faint tremor run through Walker's hands. The mask of control had completely shattered. Ranger's gaze held him in place, a living reminder of accountability that words could not negate. Janet Carter finally spoke, voice trembling. "My baby, my brave baby." She stepped slightly forward but halted, sensing Lily's focus remained solely on Ranger. Lily, small yet resolute, whispered once more, "He's scared like he made others feel." The low growl from Ranger resonated in the courtroom, a physical affirmation of her words. Hale realized that the dog's behavior was not just reactionary, it was interpretive. Ranger had internalized every microexpression of fear and guilt from Walker, and in that moment, he had become the ultimate witness. Dorsey addressed the jury directly. "Ladies and gentlemen, today you have seen the power of truth delivered without distortion. A child's courage, a dog's instincts, and corroborating evidence have combined to reveal a story that cannot be denied. The defendant's actions have left a trail of fear and harm, now exposed for all to see." The jurors were captivated, leaning forward, absorbing the testimony, the interaction, and the undeniable tension. Walker's attempts at composure had failed entirely. His hands shook, jaw tightened, eyes darted helplessly. Ranger's growl remained low, constant, a living reminder that his presence alone commanded accountability. Lily finally allowed herself to release her grip on Ranger's fur. She looked up at the judge, amber eyes gleaming with determination. "No one else should be scared," she said softly, yet firmly. The courtroom held its breath. Ranger exhaled slowly, head lowering just enough to nuzzle her gently, a gesture of validation, protection, and understanding. And in that moment, everyone understood. The trial had shifted irreversibly. The combination of innocence, courage, and instinct had created a force that could not be ignored. Walker's eyes darted around, searching for some escape, some reprieve, but there was none. The courtroom, the child, the dog, the jury, all bore witness to a truth too raw, too real to be denied. The turning point had arrived. And the final confrontation, the moment where all of the tension, fear, and courage would collide, was imminent. The courtroom had transformed. The air was electric, dense with tension, every inch of space charged with the weight of what had unfolded. Lily Carter, 3 years old, small yet monumental, remained at the center, gripping Ranger's thick fur. The dog's massive form, tense and alert, mirrored the gravity of the moment. Every juror, every officer, every reporter, and every person in the gallery felt it. The collision of innocence, instinct, and justice. Mark Walker, the defendant, sat slumped at the defense table. His hands trembled, jaw tight, eyes darting from Lily to Ranger, as if seeking reassurance that his carefully constructed facade could survive this exposure. Hale noticed a faint sheen of sweat on his forehead and a subtle quiver of his fingers. Every microexpression, every involuntary motion was captured by Ranger, and the dog's low growl was a living indictment. Judge Marian Albright leaned forward, her gavel poised, but she did not strike it yet. She understood fully that the courtroom was no longer simply a room of law. It had become an arena where truth had taken a physical form. Megan Dorsey approached Lily, crouching to the child's level. "Lily," she said softly, "you've been incredibly brave. Can you tell us one last time why you came here today?" Lily's small lips quivered, but her eyes, wide and resolute, never left Ranger's face. "Because he hurt people. He hurt dogs, and I don't want anyone else to be scared," she whispered. Her voice, though tiny, carried the weight of a lifetime of courage compressed into a single sentence. Ranger's growl deepened in response, low and resonant, vibrating through the polished floorboards. Hale's hand tightened on the leash. The dog wasn't reacting to Lily. He was reacting to Walker. every fiber of Ranger's being radiated recognition, memory, and judgment. Walker tried to lean back to appear indifferent, but Ranger's unwavering gaze pinned him like iron. The growl persisted, a constant, unrelenting reminder of accountability. Hale realized the dog's behavior was more than instinct. It was moral clarity, distilled into muscle, fur, and amber eyes. Dorsey addressed the jury, voice calm but charged with intensity. "Ladies and gentlemen, what you have witnessed here cannot be overstated. A child's bravery and a dog's instincts have unveiled a truth that has been hidden for too long. This man has inflicted fear and harm on the innocent, and today those actions have been exposed in the purest, most undeniable form." The jurors leaned forward, captivated. They had been privy to months of testimony, reports, and evidence, but nothing had resonated like this. Nothing had carried such a visceral, undeniable weight. Every photograph, every report, every prior complaint was now seen through the lens of Ranger's instincts and Lily's courage. Walker's defense attorney shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, this is unprecedented. A child and a dog cannot constitute evidence of guilt." Judge Albright's gavel came down sharply. "Objection overruled. The court recognizes the significance of the interaction between the child and the dog, combined with corroborating evidence. Proceedings will continue in full consideration of this testimony." Walker's face paled. His hands gripped the table, knuckles white. The mask of composure he had relied upon had shattered. Hale watched closely. Ranger's body was coiled, alert, every muscle taut, every growl a measured, precise assertion of truth. Lily took a tentative step closer to Ranger. "He's scared," she said, voice trembling but clear, "just like he made others feel." The room fell into silence. Ranger's growl deepened, almost as if confirming the words. Hale felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. This was no longer just a trial, it was a revelation, a confrontation between innocence and culpability, between instinct and denial. Judge Albright's voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Walker, the court has heard testimony from a child witness and observed reactions from a trained police dog, corroborated by documented evidence of prior incidents. How do you respond?" Walker opened his mouth, then closed it. He attempted to speak, but nothing emerged. His hands trembled, sweat glistened on his brow, and his eyes betrayed panic. Ranger's growl, low and unwavering, continued. Every micro-expression Walker tried to mask was laid bare by the dog's instinctual observation. Megan Dorsey stepped forward. "Your Honor, the culmination of these observations, the child's testimony and corroborating evidence, establishes a pattern of behavior and confirms the defendant's responsibility for acts of intimidation and harm. We ask that the court acknowledge this as evidence supporting conviction." The jurors scribbled notes furiously, their eyes wide, fully aware that they were witnessing something historic. Even seasoned court reporters paused to absorb the moment. A 3-year-old child and a police dog had altered the trajectory of a legal proceeding in ways unprecedented, undeniable, and profoundly moving. Hale, standing beside Ranger, felt a surge of pride and disbelief. Ranger had performed not as an instrument of law, but as an arbiter of instinctive truth. The dog had read Walker completely, assessing guilt, fear, and memory, translating what no human witness could articulate. Hale realized that Ranger had become more than a tool. He had become a silent witness, a guardian of justice in its purest, rawest form. Walker's defense attorney stood, voice faltering. "Your Honor, surely a child's words cannot bear the weight of conviction." Judge Albright's gaze was steely. "The court has considered all evidence, including witness testimony, behavioral observations, and corroborating reports. The interaction between the child and the dog is deemed significant and will be considered in the determination of responsibility." Walker's shoulders slumped. His eyes darted helplessly, searching for an escape, for a reassurance that no one could give. Ranger's gaze followed him, unwavering. The growl softened, but the intensity in the dog's eyes never wavered. Ranger had delivered a verdict of instinctual truth long before the human jury could act. Lily, sensing the shift, whispered again, small yet resolute, "No one else should be scared." The jurors exchanged glances. Some had tears in their eyes, some were nodding subtly. Even the press, trained to remain impartial, felt the human weight of what was unfolding. The courtroom had transformed into something more than legal procedure. It was a moment of moral reckoning. Janet Carter, tears streaming, whispered, "My baby, my brave baby." Lily finally allowed herself to relax slightly, glancing down at Ranger. The massive dog exhaled, lowering his head to nuzzle her gently. It was a moment of silent triumph, protection, and understanding. Ranger had affirmed her courage, she had given him guidance, and together they had exposed the truth. Judge Albright cleared her throat, signaling the next phase of the proceedings. The court recognizes the testimony, observations, and evidence presented. The jury will deliberate with full consideration of the child's statements and the behavioral responses of the police dog. Walker's shoulders drooped in defeat. Hale noticed the shift. The man had no defense left. The truth, unvarnished and instinctively recognized, had stripped him bare. Ranger had acted as a living, breathing mirror of conscience and consequence. Dorsey approached Lily, crouching one last time. "Lily, you were incredibly brave today. You helped everyone here see the truth." Lily smiled faintly, still holding Ranger's fur. "I just wanted him to know he can't hurt anyone else," she whispered. Ranger exhaled, a sound that was almost a sigh, and nudged her gently. Hale felt a lump in his throat. The dog had not only protected her, he had validated her courage, standing witness to justice in a way no human could. The courtroom remained silent, every adult present profoundly aware of what had transpired. A child's 2 words, combined with a dog's instincts, had rewritten the narrative. Justice had been delivered in the quietest, most powerful form imaginable. The gavel finally came down. The room seemed to exhale collectively. It was not just a legal conclusion, it was the culmination of courage, instinct, and truth. And as Lily Carter stepped back, holding Ranger's leash, the courtroom knew it had witnessed something extraordinary. Something that would be remembered not just as a trial, but as a testament to the power of innocence, courage, and the unspoken language of truth. The case had been won, not by arguments, not by evidence alone, but by 2 words. "He's scared." Those words, simple yet profound, had changed everything. And in that moment, Ranger nuzzled Lily one final time, as if to say, justice had been served and innocence had prevailed. The courtroom would never be the same again.